The morning sun filtered through sheer curtains as Diane Carter stood at her kitchen window, cradling a cup of coffee between her palms. She watched her daughter Angela slip into a white Mercedes outside, heading to another 12-hour shift at Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Pride swelled in her chest. Her baby girl, now Dr. Angela Thompson, chief of pediatric surgery. After all those years of sacrifice, late-night studying and student loans that seemed endless, Angela had made it. Diane's own journey had been different. 30 years as a housekeeper at Riverside Hotel had taught her about invisible labor, the kind that keeps the world running while going unnoticed. She'd scrubbed floors in designer lobbies, changed sheets in penthouses, and smiled through dismissive remarks from guests who never learned her name. But she'd put 2 children through college on those wages, and that was worth more than any recognition. 3 months ago, Angela had called with news that made Diane weep with joy. She and Samuel were buying a house in Brookhaven Estates, not renting, buying. A colonial with a wraparound porch and oak trees older than Diane herself. The kind of neighborhood Diane had only seen while riding the bus to wealthy client homes, pressing her face against the window and wondering what it felt like to belong there. Moving day had been beautiful chaos. Diane directed movers with the same efficiency she'd used managing hotel housekeeping crews. She'd unpacked boxes, hung curtains, and planted roses in the front garden while Angela and Samuel juggled work emergencies. By sunset, the house felt like home. But on her 3rd morning there, while watering those roses, a man appeared on the sidewalk. Tall, silver-haired, wearing golf attire that screamed money. He stopped and stared, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Excuse me," he called out. His voice carried that particular tone Diane knew too well, authority mixed with suspicion. "Does the owner know you're here?" Diane looked down at her gardening gloves, then back at him, choosing her words carefully. "I'm staying with my daughter. She owns this house." The man's eyes narrowed. "Your daughter," he said it like he was tasting something bitter. "And she is Dr. Angela Thompson. She's at the hospital right now, saving children's lives." Something flickered across his face, not belief but irritation at her directness. "I'm Brad Whitmore, HOA president. I keep this neighborhood safe." He emphasized the word safe as if it needed translation. "We have standards here, property values to maintain." Diane had spent 30 years reading between the lines of what people really meant. She understood perfectly. "We'll be respectful neighbors, Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, refusing to let him see how his words landed. He walked away without responding, and Diane's hands trembled as she returned to her roses. She recognized that walk, the same stride of hotel guests who'd complain about her presence in hallways, who'd question whether she belonged in employee areas despite her uniform and name tag. That evening, Angela came home exhausted, her scrub still carrying the antiseptic smell of operating rooms. Diane mentioned the encounter while preparing dinner. Angela's shoulders sagged. "Mama, Samuel and I knew this might happen, but we earned this house. We have every right to be here." "I know, baby," Diane said, stirring rice with practiced rhythm. "I just worry. Some folks don't want to see us rise." Samuel arrived later, loosening his tie as he kissed Angela hello. He was elegant even when tired, the kind of man who commanded respect in courtrooms and conference rooms. 20 years as a federal prosecutor had taught him how to fight injustice with law books and precedent. But Diane saw something else in her future son-in-law. She saw her own father, who'd integrated a factory floor in 1963 and paid for it with slashed tires and threatening phone calls. Progress always came with a price, and someone always had to pay it first. The days that followed felt like waiting for a storm. Brad Whitmore appeared everywhere, jogging past their house 3 times in one morning, standing at his mailbox watching them arrive home, attending HOA meetings where he spoke loud enough for his voice to carry through open windows. Diane noticed other things too. The Johnson family next door smiled warmly, but never when Brad was watching. Young couples crossed the street to avoid confrontation. The neighborhood existed under an unspoken rule. Brad Whitmore decided who belonged. 3 weeks before the wedding, Diane was sweeping the front porch when Brad approached again. This time his wife Patricia stood beside him, looking uncomfortable. "We need to discuss your upcoming event," Brad announced. "Several neighbors have concerns about noise, parking, and the type of gathering you're planning." Diane set down her broom carefully. "It's a wedding, Mr. Whitmore. My daughter's wedding. We have all the proper permits." "Permits don't address character," Brad said coldly. "This neighborhood has a certain reputation." Patricia touched his arm. "Brad, maybe we should." "Don't," he cut her off. "I'm protecting our investment." Diane watched them walk away, her heart heavy with familiar sorrow. She'd spent her whole life making beds for people who thought she was invisible, cleaning rooms for guests who'd never see her as equal. She'd hoped her children would escape that invisibility. But here it was again, wearing expensive golf clothes and an HOA title. That night, lying in the guest room Angela had decorated with such love, Diane prayed. Not for revenge, but for strength. For her daughter's wedding day to be unmarred by hatred. For justice to somehow find its way to this manicured street where roses bloomed but kindness struggled to take root. She didn't know yet that her prayers would be answered in ways more powerful and public than she could imagine. She didn't know that Brad Whitmore's hatred would soon collide with forces beyond his control, and that her family's dignity would be vindicated in front of the entire community. But something in her spirit whispered hope. After 30 years of quiet endurance, Diane Carter still believed that truth could triumph over prejudice, even here, even now, even in Brookhaven Estates. Part 2. The harassment began slowly, like water dripping through a crack that gradually widens into a flood. Diane noticed it first during her morning routines, those quiet hours when she'd sit on the porch with coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Brad's jogging route suddenly included multiple passes by their house. He'd slow down deliberately, staring through their windows, counting cars in the driveway. Once, he stopped entirely, pulled out his phone and took photographs of their property. When Diane waved politely, he didn't acknowledge her existence. Samuel tried to maintain peace. One Saturday morning, he approached Brad while washing his vintage motorcycle, a beautiful machine he'd restored himself over 5 years. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Samuel called out, genuinely friendly. "Beautiful day." Brad examined the motorcycle with thinly veiled disgust. "That vehicle is inappropriate for this neighborhood's aesthetic standards. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all vehicles must reflect the community's upscale character." Samuel's smile tightened slightly. "I've reviewed the bylaws thoroughly. There's no restriction on motorcycles, especially collector vehicles maintained on private property." "I'll be bringing this to the board," Brad said flatly. "We'll see what they say about your hobby." He walked away before Samuel could respond. Diane watched from the kitchen window, her son-in-law's shoulders tense with restrained frustration. She'd seen that posture before, black men forced to swallow dignity to avoid confrontation, choosing silence over self-defense because the cost of speaking up was too high. Angela experienced her own encounters. One afternoon, while planting tulips along the front walkway still wearing her hospital scrubs, Brad's voice cut through the peaceful work. "Excuse me, miss, are you the new landscaping service?" Angela looked up slowly, dirt under her fingernails, exhaustion in her bones from a 10-hour surgery. "I'm Dr. Thompson. I live here." Brad's skepticism was palpable. "You're the doctor," he said it like she'd claimed to be an astronaut. "What kind of doctor works in gardens?" "The kind who owns her home and enjoys planting flowers," Angela replied evenly, refusing to let him see her anger. Brad grunted. "Well, make sure those tulips meet HOA color standards. We don't allow anything too vibrant." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Diane, watching from the doorway, understood its secondary meaning perfectly. The HOA meetings became performances of Brad's power. Diane attended one with Angela, sitting in folding chairs in the community center while Brad held court like a king addressing subjects. As your president, I maintain relationships with everyone who matters in this city, Brad announced, his voice booming with self-importance. Police Chief Martinez and I golf together every Sunday. Mayor Thompson, no relation to our new residents, attends my summer barbecues. City council members trust my judgment completely. He paused, letting his influence sink in. These relationships keep our property values high and our streets safe. When I call City Hall, people listen. When I report concerns, they're addressed immediately. Other residents nodded along like disciples. The Johnson family sat near the back, meeting Diane's eyes briefly with apologetic sympathy before looking away. Fear kept voices silent. Brad's power wasn't just social, it was structural, woven into every neighborhood decision. After the meeting, elderly Mrs. Patterson approached Angela quietly. "Dear, I'm sorry about Brad's behavior. Some of us don't share his views, but he controls so much here. The pool committee, the landscaping contracts, even our insurance rates. People are afraid to challenge him." Angela squeezed her hand gently. "I understand. Thank you for telling me." But understanding didn't ease the weight. Every day brought new microaggressions. Brad questioning Samuel's right to park on their own street, suggesting their mail might be misdelivered, commenting loudly to neighbors about property value concerns whenever Angela or Samuel appeared. Diane watched her daughter's joy dim slightly each week. Angela had worked so hard, scholarships, student loans, 80-hour resident shifts, proving herself repeatedly in operating rooms where she was often the only black woman. She'd earned this house, this neighborhood, this life. Yet Brad Whitmore made her feel like an intruder in her own home. 3 weeks before the wedding, the situation escalated. Samuel was reviewing case files on the porch when Brad appeared with a folder full of printed HOA regulations. "Mr. Jefferson, we need to discuss your flagrant violations." Samuel looked up calmly, his legal training evident in his composed response. "What violations specifically?" Brad flipped through papers dramatically. "Your garbage cans were visible from the street for 47 minutes past collection time. Your motorcycle violates aesthetic standards despite your claims otherwise. Your exterior light fixtures don't match approved colonial specifications." Each accusation was petty, technical, designed to harass rather than inform. Samuel recognized the tactic. He'd prosecuted discrimination cases using similar patterns as evidence. "Mr. Whitmore," Samuel said carefully, "I've documented every interaction we've had, every complaint, every photograph you've taken of our property, every HOA meeting where you've referenced us specifically. I'm a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights violations. I understand exactly what's happening here." Brad's face flushed red. "Are you threatening me? Because I know people who can make your life very difficult in this city." "I'm not threatening anyone," Samuel replied evenly. "I'm simply making clear that I recognize a pattern of targeted harassment based on race." "Race?" Brad laughed harshly. "I'm protecting property values. If you're offended by community standards, perhaps you chose the wrong neighborhood." He walked away triumphantly, leaving Samuel gripping his case files with white-knuckled frustration. That evening, Diane found Angela crying in the bedroom, quiet tears that spoke of accumulated pain. Her daughter, who'd saved countless children's lives, who'd been featured in medical journals, who'd earned every accolade through brilliance and dedication, now sobbed because a neighbor made her feel unwelcome in her own home. "Mama, maybe we made a mistake," Angela whispered. "Maybe we pushed too hard too fast." Diane held her daughter close, stroking her hair like she'd done when Angela was small. "Baby girl, you didn't make any mistake. You earned this house. You belong here. That man's hatred is his problem, not your failure. But our wedding, Mama, what if he ruins it? What if his connections really do cause problems? Diane pulled back, looking into her daughter's eyes with fierce determination. Then we'll face those problems together. Your daddy and I didn't raise you to run from bullies. We raised you to stand firm in your truth. Neither woman knew how prophetic those words would become. Neither could imagine that Brad's promised connections would soon spectacularly fail him, that his power would evaporate like morning dew under the rising sun of federal authority. But Diane's faith never wavered. She'd spent 30 years watching powerful people underestimate quiet black women. She'd learned that strength didn't always announce itself with loud voices and grand gestures. Sometimes strength looked like continuing to plant tulips despite insults. Sometimes it looked like reviewing case law while someone hurled petty accusations. Sometimes it looked like planning a wedding while surrounded by hatred. The storm was building, but Diane Carter had weathered storms before. Part 3. Wedding preparations transformed their home into organized chaos. Diane coordinated vendors with the precision she'd developed managing hotel operations, caterers, florists, musicians, photographers. Each detail mattered because this wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration of belonging, a celebration of love surviving despite hatred's best efforts to poison it. Brad watched everything from his front window like a general surveying enemy movements. Diane noticed him photographing delivery trucks, writing down license plate numbers, timing how long vendors stayed. His surveillance felt oppressive, turning joyful preparations into something requiring vigilance. One afternoon, the wedding planner arrived, a cheerful woman named Rachel who specialized in elegant outdoor ceremonies. She walked the property with Angela and Diane, envisioning table placements and lighting arrangements. "This backyard is perfect," Rachel enthused. "The oak trees will provide natural shade, and string lights between the branches will create magic after sunset. Have you secured all necessary permits?" "Everything's filed with the city," Angela confirmed. "Music permits, occupancy limits, parking arrangements. We followed every regulation." Diane noticed Brad emerging from his house, drawn by their conversation. He approached with purposeful strides, his expression already hostile. "Excuse me, what's this about permits?" he demanded without greeting. Rachel turned professionally. "We're planning a wedding ceremony and reception. All city permits have been properly obtained." Brad's face reddened. "A reception, how many people?" 80 guests, Angela answered calmly. "Well within residential gathering limits." 80 people, Brad's voice rose sharply. "That's unacceptable. The noise, the traffic, the parking. This neighborhood isn't equipped for events of this scale." Rachel checked her tablet. "Sir, I've planned over 200 weddings in residential areas. This gathering is actually quite modest, and all legal requirements have been met." "Legal requirements mean nothing when property values are at stake," Brad shot back. "I'm calling the mayor personally. My connections will shut this down immediately." He stalked away, already dialing his phone. Rachel watched him go with concern creasing her forehead. "Is he always like this?" she asked quietly. "Every single day," Diane answered, her voice heavy with resignation. That evening, Samuel came home carrying news that made Diane's heart swell with hope and pride. He gathered Angela and Diane in the living room, his face luminous with barely contained joy. "The Senate confirmed my appointment today," he said softly. "I'm officially a federal district judge." Angela threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "Sam, oh my God, Sam." Diane hugged them both, understanding the magnitude of this achievement. Her future son-in-law would now interpret federal law, shape civil rights protections, serve justice for an entire district. 20 years of prosecuting discrimination cases had prepared him for this honor. "The swearing-in ceremony happens next month," Samuel explained. But the appointment is official. Federal judges serve lifetime appointments. I'll have the authority to hear cases involving civil rights, constitutional law, federal crimes, everything I've worked toward my entire career. Does Brad know? Diane asked carefully. Samuel shook his head. I haven't announced it publicly yet. We wanted to keep the wedding focus on Angela and me, not my career. Sam, this changes everything, Angela said. Brad keeps threatening us with his local connections, but you're about to have federal authority. You'll outrank everyone he knows. That's not why we keep quiet about harassment, Samuel reminded her gently. We stay silent because speaking up shouldn't be necessary. We belong here regardless of my position. Diane understood his principle, but she also understood power. Brad Whitmore had spent months wielding his local influence like a weapon. He had no idea he was targeting someone about to hold federal judicial authority, power that transcended every city connection Brad claimed. The wedding guest list reflected Samuel's professional stature. Federal judges, prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, and Justice Department officials would attend. Diane reviewed the names with quiet amazement. Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd mentored Samuel through his early career. United States Attorney Michael Rodriguez. Federal marshals who'd worked cases with Samuel for years. Baby, this isn't just a wedding, Diane observed. This is a gathering of federal power. These are our friends, Angela corrected gently. They happen to be federal officials, but they're here because they love us. Still, Diane couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was brewing. Brad's harassment had been building toward confrontation. Samuel's judicial appointment represented authority Brad couldn't comprehend. The wedding would bring these forces together in their backyard, and Diane sensed the collision would be explosive. 2 days before the wedding, Brad escalated his campaign. He appeared at their door with official-looking documents, his expression triumphant. I've filed formal complaints with every city department, he announced when Samuel answered. Building code violations, noise ordinance concerns, parking restrictions. I've also contacted Police Chief Martinez personally. She's a close friend. We serve together on the police charity board. I donate $50,000 annually. When I call, she listens. Samuel accepted the documents calmly, scanning them with prosecutorial precision. Mr. Whitmore, these complaints are baseless. We've violated no codes or ordinances. This is documented harassment. Call it whatever you want, Brad sneered. My connections will ensure your little party faces maximum scrutiny. Every code inspector, every police officer, every city official will be watching. One violation, and I'll have this event shut down immediately. After Brad left, Diane found Samuel standing at the kitchen window, jaw clenched with restrained anger. Mama Diane, he said quietly, I've spent 20 years fighting people like Brad Whitmore in courtrooms. I've prosecuted discrimination, defended civil rights, upheld constitutional protections. But standing here in my own home, facing this hatred personally, it's different. It cuts deeper. Diane moved beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Samuel, you fought for justice your whole career. Sometimes warriors have to experience the battles they've defended others through. This isn't weakness, it's humanity. What if he really does disrupt our wedding? Samuel asked, vulnerability showing through his usual composure. What if his connections actually work? Then we'll face it together, Diane answered firmly. But I've got a feeling, baby. I've got a feeling that Brad Whitmore is about to learn a very important lesson about real power versus imagined influence. The night before the wedding, Diane couldn't sleep. She walked through the house, touching flowers that would be in Angela's bouquet, checking the backyard where love would be celebrated despite surrounding hatred. Through the window, she saw Brad's house dark and silent, like a storm cloud waiting to break. She'd spent 30 years being invisible to powerful people. She'd cleaned their rooms, washed their sheets, served their needs while remaining unseen. She taught her children to work twice as hard, stay twice as humble, and never give prejudice an excuse. But standing in this house her daughter had earned, preparing for a wedding that represented everything her family had overcome, Diane felt something shift inside her. Not anger, she'd never let hatred poison her heart, but certainty. A deep, unshakable certainty that justice was coming, that truth would prevail, that Brad Whitmore's power was built on sand about to wash away. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tomorrow would test everything her family believed about dignity, justice, and belonging. Tomorrow, Brad Whitmore would make his move. And tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would discover that true power doesn't come from golf course connections or HOA presidencies. True power comes from federal authority, constitutional law, and the courage to stand firm when hatred tries to push you down. Diane didn't sleep that night, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready. Part 4. The wedding morning arrived with golden sunlight that felt almost sacred. Diane woke before dawn, her body running on adrenaline and mother's love. She moved through the house quietly, checking final details while Angela and Samuel still slept. The backyard had been transformed overnight into something magical. White tents billowed gently in the morning breeze. Chairs arranged in perfect rows faced a flower-covered arch where vows would be exchanged. String lights hung between oak branches, waiting to twinkle against the evening sky. Everything spoke of love, hope, and new beginnings. But Diane couldn't ignore Brad Whitmore's house next door. She saw him packing on his lawn at 6 in the morning, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing angrily. Even from a distance, his agitation was palpable. He was planning something. Angela emerged from the bedroom at 7, her face glowing with bride's anticipation mixed with underlying anxiety. "Mama, do you think he'll actually try something today?" Diane helped her daughter into a silk robe, brushing Angela's hair with gentle strokes. "Baby girl, if he does, we'll handle it. You focus on marrying the man you love. Let everything else fall away." "I keep thinking about all the children I've operated on," Angela said softly. "Kids who faced impossible odds, parents who trusted me with their Bobby's lives. I've held hearts in my hands, Mama, literal hearts. And somehow this neighbor makes me feel small." "That's what hatred does," Diane replied, meeting her daughter's eyes in the mirror. "It tries to shrink people who shine too bright. But you're a light he can't dim, Angela. You're a doctor who saves lives. Today you're marrying a man who serves justice. Brad Whitmore's darkness can't touch that truth." By 10 o'clock, vendors arrived in steady succession. The caterer's truck brought elegant displays of food. The florist added final touches to centerpieces. Musicians began setting up under the tent. Each arrival drew Brad to his window, phone constantly in his hand, documenting everything. Samuel spent the morning in his study, preparing his vows and making peace with whatever the day might bring. Diane brought him coffee around 11, finding him staring at his wedding ring, a simple gold band that represented commitment stronger than any obstacle. "Son, you all right?" she asked gently. He smiled, but sadness touched his eyes. "I'm marrying the love of my life today. That should be all I'm thinking about. Instead, I'm worried about what our neighbor might do, what officers might respond to false complaints, how to protect our guests from harassment." "That's not your job today," Diane said firmly. "Your job is to stand under that arch and promise to love my daughter forever. Everything else, we'll face it if it comes." Guests began arriving at 2 o'clock. Diane watched luxury vehicles pull up, Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses, carrying people whose professional credentials would make Brad Whitmore's claimed connections look tiny by comparison. Federal judges emerged in elegant suits. Prosecutors arrived with their families. Civil rights attorneys greeted each other with warm embraces. Judge Patricia Morrison, distinguished in navy silk, hugged Samuel with maternal affection. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Confirmed federal judge marrying a brilliant woman. You've come so far from that eager young prosecutor I met 20 years ago. United States Attorney Michael Rodriguez arrived with his wife, immediately engaging Samuel in conversation about upcoming cases. Federal Marshal Robert Torres, massive and gentle, brought his daughters who chased each other across the lawn in their flower girl dresses. The gathering represented extraordinary federal power, people who shaped law, prosecuted injustice, and defended constitutional rights. Yet they laughed and chatted like any family celebration, their humanity more evident than their authority. Diane noticed Brad watching from his property line, his face growing redder as each prestigious vehicle arrived. She saw him on his phone constantly, packing like a caged animal, his gestures increasingly frantic. Whatever he was planning, it was building toward explosion. At 3 o'clock, the ceremony began. Classical music floated across the backyard as guests took their seats. Samuel stood under the flower arch, elegant in his tuxedo, flanked by his best man, another federal prosecutor who'd stood beside him through countless trials. Then Angela appeared at the top of the porch steps, and time seemed to stop. Her wedding dress was simple perfection, white silk that caught the afternoon light, a veil that framed her beautiful face, a bouquet of white roses that trembled slightly in her nervous hands. Diane walked beside her daughter, feeling the weight of this moment. 30 years she'd spent making beds for other people. 30 years of invisible labor so her children could have visible success. Now she was walking her baby girl toward marriage, toward a man who would love and honor her, toward a future built on everything Diane had sacrificed to make possible. "I love you, Mama," Angela whispered as they reached the arch. "I love you too, baby," Diane answered, squeezing her hand before stepping aside. The minister began the ceremony with words about love transcending all obstacles. Samuel and Angela held hands, eyes locked, the rest of the world fading away. For precious minutes, nothing existed except their love, not Brad's hatred, not federal authority, not civil rights struggles. Just two people promising forever. "Angela Marie Thompson," Samuel said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you through every challenge life brings. I promise to honor your strength, celebrate your brilliance, and stand beside you when the world tries to diminish your light." Angela's vows came through tears of joy. "Samuel David Jefferson, you taught me that justice isn't just a career, it's a calling. You've shown me how to fight prejudice with dignity, answer hatred with grace, and believe that truth will always prevail. I promise to love you with that same unwavering faith." The moment felt sacred, powerful, unstoppable. Love was conquering hate in real time, proving that no amount of prejudice could diminish what they'd built together. And then Brad Whitmore's voice shattered the peace like glass exploding. 911. "This is Bradley Whitmore at 1247 Maple Drive. I'm reporting major criminal activity disguised as a wedding." His voice carried across the gathering deliberately, meant to be heard. Diane felt her stomach drop as all eyes turned toward the property line where Brad stood, phone pressed to his ear, face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "Send every available unit immediately. These people are definitely not who they claim to be. I personally know Police Chief Martinez. She'll want officers here fast. This is a gang gathering, possible drug activity, definitely suspicious. Expensive cars that clearly don't belong to these individuals." Angela's face went pale beneath her veil. Samuel's jaw clenched with restrained fury. Federal officials watched in stunned disbelief as a wedding ceremony became the target of malicious false reporting. "I'm HOA president," Brad continued loudly. "I've documented everything. These so-called guests are probably casing houses for future robberies. The homeowners claim to be professionals, but I suspect fraud, identity theft, maybe organized crime. Chief Martinez will confirm my credibility. I donate $50,000 annually to police charities." The classical music died away. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Children hid behind their parents as Brad's venomous accusations polluted the celebration like toxic smoke. Diane moved instinctively toward Angela, placing protective arms around her daughter. But Angela stood frozen, bouquet trembling in her hands, her dream day transformed into public humiliation. Federal Judge Morrison's face hardened with judicial fury. U.S. Attorney Rodriguez pulled out his phone, already preparing federal responses. Federal Marshal Torres positioned himself protectively, years of law enforcement training kicking in automatically. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, sharp, urgent, growing closer. Red and blue lights flickered between houses as police cruisers responded to Brad's false emergency. The timing felt cruelly deliberate. Samuel was lifting Angela's veil for their first kiss as husband and wife, when the police spotlight swept across their celebration like a searchlight hunting criminals. Diane watched her daughter's joy die in real time, watched decades of achievement and dignity get crushed under the weight of one man's racist hatred amplified by police authority. She'd spent 30 years being invisible, but in this moment, she wanted to be seen. She wanted every officer, every neighbor, every witness to see a black family being destroyed at their moment of greatest happiness. Brad approached the arriving officers with theatrical urgency, playing his role perfectly. "Thank God you're here. I've been watching this suspicious activity for hours. Unknown individuals, unauthorized vehicles, clear violations of multiple ordinances. This neighborhood needs protection." And Diane Carter, who'd spent her life staying quiet, swallowing indignities, choosing peace over confrontation, felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. Her daughter had earned everything: the medical degree, the surgical skills, this house, this wedding. Samuel had dedicated his life to justice. Neither of them deserved this public degradation. But more than anger, Diane felt certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty that Brad Whitmore had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd called down legal authority on people who embodied federal power. He'd weaponized police against a federal judge surrounded by federal officials. The collision was inevitable now. Justice was coming, swift, complete, and undeniable. Diane held her daughter close and waited for the storm to break. Part 5. The police cruiser's lights painted the elegant wedding scene in harsh reds and blues, transforming celebration into crisis. Officer Rebecca Martinez stepped out first, her trained eyes immediately scanning the gathering. 20 years of law enforcement had taught her to read situations quickly, and nothing about this scene suggested criminal activity. Elegant decorations, formal wedding attire, a cake visible through the tent opening, classical musicians holding instruments awkwardly, uncertain whether to continue playing. This was clearly a wedding celebration, not the gang gathering Dispatch had reported. Her partner, Sergeant David Carter, emerged with rookie eagerness written across his face. Young, ambitious, hungry to prove himself. Rebecca had seen that combination lead to bad decisions before. Brad rushed toward them like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Officers, thank God you're here. I'm Bradley Whitmore, HOA president. I've documented hours of suspicious activity. Unknown individuals, expensive vehicles that clearly don't belong in this neighborhood, obvious signs of criminal organization." Rebecca's instincts screamed warning. The complainant's language was too calculated, too focused on expensive vehicles and unknown individuals, rather than actual criminal behavior. She'd heard these kinds of complaints before, code words for people who don't look like they belong here. "Sir, this appears to be a wedding celebration," Rebecca said professionally. "Can you describe specific criminal activity you've witnessed?" "Look at those cars," Brad insisted, pointing dramatically. "Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses. Where did these people get money for vehicles like that? Probably drug money, stolen cars, money laundering through fake wedding gifts. Samuel stepped forward, still holding Angela's hand, his wedding ring catching the dying sunlight. "Officers, I'm Samuel Jefferson. This is our home and this is our wedding reception. We have all required permits for this private celebration." "Don't let him lawyer his way out of this," Brad interrupted aggressively. "I personally know Police Chief Martinez. She and I serve together on the police charity board. I donate $50,000 annually. When I call in concerns, she expects them to be taken seriously." Carter's posture straightened at the mention of the chief's name. Rebecca saw the shift immediately. Her young partner was being influenced by Brad's claimed authority. "We'll need to verify some information," Carter announced, pulling out his notebook with officious importance. "David," Rebecca said quietly, "this is clearly a legitimate wedding. We should wish them well and clear the scene." "The complainant has serious allegations and verified city connections," Carter responded stiffly. "We need to be thorough." Diane watched from beside the wedding arch, her protective instincts on full alert. She'd seen this dynamic before: powerful white men using authority figures as weapons, young officers eager to please influential people regardless of truth or justice. Brad became emboldened by Carter's receptiveness. "Officer, I've been monitoring their activities for weeks. This gathering is probably a front for criminal networking. Look at those so-called wedding guests. Half of them probably have extensive criminal records." Federal Judge Patricia Morrison stepped forward, her judicial bearing unmistakable. "Officer, I'm Federal Judge Patricia Morrison from the D.C. District Court. This is a legitimate wedding celebration for a respected colleague. These accusations are completely baseless." "Anyone can claim to be a judge," Brad scoffed loudly. "Officer Carter, they're obviously using fake credentials to intimidate you. Don't let them manipulate this investigation." Angela gripped her bouquet so tightly that rose thorns drew blood on her palm. Diane moved to her daughter's side, gently taking the flowers and wrapping Angela's hand in a white napkin. "Ma'am, what's your occupation?" Carter asked Angela directly, his pen poised over his notebook. "I'm Dr. Angela Thompson Jefferson," she answered with quiet dignity despite humiliation. "Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Metropolitan Children's Hospital." Brad's laughter echoed across the gathering. "Anyone can claim to be a doctor. Check her credentials, probably as fake as this entire charade." Diane felt rage rising in her chest, not hot and explosive, but cold and focused. Her daughter had spent years in medical school, residency, fellowship. She'd saved hundreds of children's lives. She'd earned international recognition for surgical techniques that appeared in medical journals worldwide. And now she was being called a fraud at her own wedding. U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez stepped forward with federal authority. "Officers, I'm United States Attorney Rodriguez for the Northern District. This harassment is completely inappropriate. These are respected federal officials celebrating a colleague's wedding." "Federal officials?" Brad's voice dripped with mockery. "Now they're claiming federal employment. Officer Carter, they're getting more creative with their lies by the minute. I strongly suggest you start making arrests before this criminal organization escapes." Carter felt pressure crushing him from all sides. Brad's threatened connections to the police chief, multiple people claiming federal authority, his partner urging caution, his own ambition pushing him toward decisive action that would prove his competence. "Based on the complainant's allegations," Carter announced, "we need to conduct searches of all vehicles for contraband and weapons." "Sergeant," Samuel said carefully, his prosecutorial training evident, "what specific probable cause do you have for conducting warrantless vehicle searches?" "We have a reliable complainant with verified city connections reporting ongoing criminal activity," Carter responded defensively. Federal Marshal Robert Torres intervened with professional calm. "Sergeant, I'm Federal Marshal Tours, badge number 4429. You're about to violate the Fourth Amendment rights of multiple federal officials. I strongly advise reconsidering your current approach." Brad became increasingly desperate as his narrative started crumbling. "They're all sophisticated liars using fake government credentials. Officer Carter, these are professional criminals who have studied government procedures to avoid detection. You can't let them intimidate you with phony federal authority." The confrontation spiraled dangerously. Diane felt helpless watching her family's dignity being shredded in public, watching young officers choose Brad's prejudice over obvious truth. Carter made his catastrophic decision. "Sir, you're being argumentative and obstructive. I'm placing you under arrest for interfering with a police investigation." The words hit like physical blows. Wedding guests gasped audibly. Angela's face drained of all color beneath her veil. Federal officials watched in horrified disbelief as a local sergeant threatened to arrest a federal prosecutor at his own wedding. Brad's triumph felt complete. "That's exactly right, Officer Carter. Arrest the ringleader first, then work through the rest of these criminals systematically. Chief Martinez will hear about your excellent work tonight." Rebecca grabbed her partner's arm desperately. "David, we have no probable cause. We're about to create a massive incident." But Carter had committed to his course, emboldened by Brad's promised support and threatened by competing authorities. Then tires screeched in the driveway. A black sedan with city government plates stopped abruptly, and two figures emerged moving with urgent purpose: Police Chief Martinez and Mayor Thompson. Diane recognized the expression on their faces immediately. Horror, absolute horror at the catastrophe they were witnessing. Chief Martinez's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Sergeant Carter, step back immediately." Mayor Thompson surveyed the scene with the expression of someone watching their career evaporate. Federal judges, U.S. attorneys, federal marshals, all standing at a wedding celebration being treated like criminals. "Dear God," the mayor whispered, "what kind of disaster have we walked into?" Brad rushed toward them confidently, expecting support from his claimed connections. "Chief Martinez, Mayor Thompson, thank God you're here. I've been trying to get these criminals arrested for hours. You know me, we golf together, we serve on boards together. Tell Officer Carter to proceed with arrests immediately." But Chief Martinez wasn't looking at Brad. She was staring at Samuel with recognition dawning like sunrise after the darkest night. "Judge Jefferson," she said slowly, her voice filled with dawning comprehension. "Judge Samuel Jefferson, the newly confirmed federal district judge." The revelation detonated through the scene like a nuclear explosion. Time seemed to freeze. Brad's triumphant expression collapsed into confusion. Carter's hand hovered near his handcuffs, trembling. Rebecca closed her eyes with relief and resignation. Samuel reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate calm, producing official documents bearing federal seals. "Chief Martinez, Mayor Thompson, I'm Judge Samuel Jefferson, confirmed by the United States Senate 3 weeks ago. I'll be sworn in as a federal district judge next month." The documents passed from hand to hand. Federal appointment papers signed by the president, Senate confirmation letters, judicial credentials that represented authority beyond anything Brad Whitmore had ever imagined. Brad's face transformed from confusion to absolute terror as reality destroyed his carefully constructed worldview. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Blood drained from his face so rapidly he aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "A federal judge," he whispered. "That's impossible. Federal judges don't live in regular neighborhoods." Diane watched justice arrive with swift, complete, unstoppable force. The man who'd spent months wielding local connections like weapons now faced federal authority he couldn't comprehend or fight. The storm had broken, and Brad Whitmore stood at its center, realizing too late that he'd attacked forces far beyond his power to control. Part 6. The silence that followed Samuel's revelation felt heavy enough to crush bones. Brad Whitmore stood frozen, his brain struggling to process information that destroyed every assumption he'd built his harassment campaign upon. Chief Martinez's face had gone from horror to something approaching terror. She'd responded to a complaint about gang activity and found herself facing a federal judge surrounded by federal officials, all at their wedding celebration she'd helped disrupt. "Judge Jefferson," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "on behalf of the entire police department, I offer our deepest, most sincere apologies. This is a complete catastrophe of justice." Mayor Thompson looked physically ill. "Your Honor, this incident will be investigated thoroughly. We'll cooperate fully with any federal inquiry." Brad finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "Your Honor, please. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea who you were. I would never knowingly harass a federal judge." Samuel's response came with judicial precision. "Mr. Whitmore, ignorance of my position doesn't excuse filing false police reports or racial harassment. Federal courts take civil rights violations very seriously." Federal Judge Morrison stepped forward, her authority radiating like heat from a furnace. "Mr. Whitmore, federal judges live in communities across America. What's very real is that you've just filed false reports against a federal official. You've attempted to use police as weapons against people whose authority far exceeds any connection you claim." "I didn't know," Brad repeated desperately, like a mantra that could rewind time. "I thought they were just—" He stopped himself, but everyone heard the unspoken words. Just what? Just black people who couldn't possibly belong in his neighborhood. Just professionals whose success didn't fit his racist assumptions. U.S. Attorney Rodriguez pulled out his phone with prosecutorial efficiency. "Judge Jefferson, this incident involves clear violations of federal civil rights statutes. The FBI will conduct a comprehensive investigation." Brad's legs buckled. He grabbed his mailbox for support, his expensive golf clothes suddenly looking rumpled and cheap. "FBI, federal investigation. I have a family, a business. Please don't destroy my entire life over one mistake." "This wasn't a mistake," Angela said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "This was deliberate, calculated harassment. You've terrorized us for months. You called us criminals at our wedding. You tried to have my husband arrested on our happiest day." Diane stood beside her daughter, one protective hand on Angela's shoulder. She'd stayed silent through decades of indignities, but watching justice arrive filled her with something close to wonder. The powerful man who'd made her family feel unwelcome now cowered before federal authority he'd inadvertently attacked. Sergeant Carter looked like he might vomit. His career was evaporating in real time, destroyed by his decision to trust Brad's prejudice over his own training and instincts. "Your Honor," he stammered, "I have no excuse. I destroyed my career because I chose to believe false accusations over obvious truth." Chief Martinez's voice was ice. "Sergeant Carter, you're suspended immediately pending federal investigation. Badge and weapon, now." Carter's hands shook as he surrendered his badge. The metal landed in the chief's palm with finality, the sound of a career ending, of ambition destroyed by prejudice. Rebecca Martinez, who tried desperately to prevent this catastrophe, stepped forward. "Your Honor, I attempted to stop this harassment." Sergeant Carter proceeded despite clear evidence this was a legitimate celebration. Samuel nodded slowly. "Officer Martinez, your attempts to de-escalate are noted. This investigation will focus on those who enabled and executed harassment, not those who tried to prevent it." Brad began hyperventilating, his chest heaving. "Your Honor, I'll sell my house. I'll move away. Just please don't press federal charges, I'm begging you." "Federal prosecution isn't my decision," Samuel responded with judicial calm. "The Department of Justice will determine appropriate charges. But Mr. Whitmore, you need to understand something. Federal judges serve for life. Our decisions create precedents that shape American law for generations. You didn't just harass your neighbors. You attacked federal authority, weaponized police against federal officials, and violated civil rights in front of dozens of federal witnesses." The wedding guests, silent throughout the confrontation, began processing what they'd witnessed. Federal officials who'd arrived for a celebration now became witnesses to civil rights violations. Their presence transformed a personal attack into a federal case. Media vans began arriving, alerted by social media posts going viral. News crews leaped from vehicles, cameras rolling, sensing a story that would dominate headlines. "This is Channel 7 News," a reporter announced breathlessly. "We're live at Brookhaven Estates, where a federal judge's wedding was disrupted by racially motivated false police reports. Details are still emerging, but sources confirm Police Chief Martinez and Mayor Thompson are on scene." Brad watched his public destruction unfold in real time. His phone buzzed incessantly, friends distancing themselves, business associates canceling contracts, club memberships being revoked. Social media exploded with condemnation as video clips received thousands of shares. The Johnson family emerged from their house carrying flowers, finally finding courage. "Judge Jefferson, we're ashamed we didn't speak up sooner. We witnessed months of harassment and stayed silent. This neighborhood is honored to have you." Other neighbors followed, some genuine in their support, others desperate to distance themselves from Brad's actions. The power dynamics that had kept people quiet for months evaporated under federal scrutiny. Brad's wife Patricia made her choice, approaching with dignity despite her husband's disgrace. "Judge Jefferson, Dr. Jefferson, I'm filing for divorce immediately. My husband's racism doesn't represent my values. I won't let his hatred destroy our children's future." She removed her wedding ring with finality, placing it in Brad's trembling hand. "You did this to yourself. You chose prejudice over humanity." Diane watched the complete reversal with quiet satisfaction. Not revenge. She'd never let hatred poison her heart. But justice. Pure, undeniable justice flowing through federal authority that Brad had never imagined could touch him. Mayor Thompson spoke urgently to the assembled officials. "The city will implement immediate policy reforms. We're establishing federal oversight of police responses to complaints in integrated neighborhoods. This catastrophe will drive systemic change." Federal marshal tours coordinated security efficiently. "Your Honor, we're providing federal protection for the duration of your celebration. This is now a federal incident scene." Samuel looked at Angela, her wedding dress pristine despite the chaos, her face showing exhaustion and pain but also strength. "Angela, I'm so sorry our wedding day became this." She squeezed his hand. "Sam, our wedding day became something more important than we imagined. Today justice arrived in Brookhaven Estates. Today federal authority protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Today love survived hatred's best efforts." Diane felt tears on her cheeks, not sadness but release. 30 years of invisible labor, of swallowed dignity, of choosing peace over confrontation, had led to this moment. Her daughter standing in federal protection, her son-in-law wielding judicial authority, and a racist neighbor facing consequences he'd never dreamed possible. The wedding photographer, no longer afraid, began documenting the historic reversal. The contrast was breathtaking, Samuel standing with quiet dignity while Brad collapsed under the weight of his own hatred. "Should we continue the celebration?" Angela asked softly. Samuel smiled, genuine warmth breaking through judicial composure. "Angela, we've just shown this entire neighborhood that love conquers hate, that federal justice protects all Americans, and that no amount of prejudice can diminish what we've built together. Yes, let's celebrate." The classical musicians resumed playing. Federal officials returned to their seats. Children emerged from behind parents, sensing safety had been restored. The wedding celebration prepared to resume, transformed by trauma but ultimately triumphant. Brad sat on his front steps, watching his empire crumble. Phone calls flooded City Hall demanding accountability. Federal investigators were already being assigned to his case. His real estate business was hemorrhaging clients. His social standing evaporated like morning dew. The man who'd claimed neighborhood control now faced federal prosecution from his intended victim. The man who'd weaponized police now watched federal marshals protect the wedding he'd tried to destroy. The man who'd spent months inflicting psychological terrorism now experienced complete, irrevocable justice. Diane raised a glass of champagne, her voice clear and strong. To my daughter and son-in-law, may your love always triumph over hatred. May your courage inspire others. May your wedding day be remembered not just for the attacks you endured, but for the justice that prevailed. Guests echoed the toast, their voices rising together. Federal judges and family members, prosecutors and children, marshals and musicians, all united in celebration of love surviving despite hatred's best efforts. Brad heard the celebration resume, heard laughter and joy replace the chaos he'd created, and he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He'd attacked people whose power was real, whose authority was federal, whose protection came from constitutional law itself. He'd weaponized local connections against federal officials who could reshape civil rights enforcement for generations. Justice had arrived in Brookhaven Estates, and it wore Samuel Jefferson's face. Part 7. 3 months passed with the speed and intensity of a hurricane making landfall. The FBI investigation into Brad Whitmore's harassment campaign moved with federal efficiency that local authorities couldn't match or obstruct. Diane watched it unfold from her daughter's house, the house that had become ground zero for civil rights enforcement reform. Special Agent Jennifer Williams led a team of investigators who descended on Brad's life like archaeologists excavating layers of documented hatred. Mrs. Carter, Agent Williams explained during one interview, we've uncovered extensive evidence of systematic discrimination. Mr. Whitmore didn't just target your family. We found over 200 instances of racially motivated complaints spanning 5 years. The investigation revealed everything: emails to city officials expressing desires to maintain neighborhood character, financial records showing donations tied to discriminatory policy advocacy, social media posts containing explicit racial slurs he'd thought were private. He built an entire infrastructure of harassment, Agent Williams continued. He used HOA authority, police connections, and city relationships as weapons against minority residents. Your family became his focus, but you weren't his first victims. Other families came forward after news coverage gave them courage. The Martinez family, who'd faced constant code violations for foreign-looking decorations. The Chen family, questioned repeatedly about their business activities despite being retired professors. The Thompson family, no relation to Angela, who'd sold their house after months of Brad's harassment made staying unbearable. Each story added weight to federal charges accumulating against Brad Whitmore like snow building toward an avalanche. The trial began on a cold morning in January. Diane sat in the federal courthouse where Samuel would soon preside, watching Brad enter in a suit that hung loose on his frame. He'd lost 30 pounds during pretrial proceedings, his face gaunt with stress and sleepless nights. Federal prosecutor James Martinez addressed the jury with devastating precision. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant didn't make a simple mistake. He orchestrated a campaign of psychological terrorism using government resources as weapons. He specifically targeted a federal judge and federal officials because of their race. The evidence overwhelmed any defense. Video recordings from multiple angles showed Brad's calculated cruelty at the wedding. Federal judges, prosecutors, and marshals testified about the unprecedented nature of the harassment. Expert witnesses explained the psychological warfare inherent in weaponizing police against minorities. Brad's attorney struggled against impossible odds. "My client made errors in judgment, but filing complaints isn't a federal hate crime." "This wasn't filing complaints," Prosecutor Martinez countered. "This was systematic civil rights violations under color of law. The defendant used his HOA authority and police connections to enforce racial discrimination." Diane testified on the fourth day, describing months of accumulated indignities, the questioning of her right to be in her daughter's home, the constant surveillance, the escalating harassment. She spoke with quiet dignity that made several jurors wipe their eyes. "Did you feel safe in your daughter's neighborhood?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Diane answered simply. "I felt like we were being hunted. Every day brought new ways Mr. Whitmore tried to make us feel unwelcome in the home my daughter had earned." The jury deliberated for 2 hours, swift by federal standards, suggesting they found Brad's actions particularly egregious. "We the jury find the defendant guilty on all counts. Civil rights violations, filing false reports with federal intent, conspiracy to violate constitutional rights of federal officials." Brad's remaining color drained completely. His attorney caught him as his legs gave out. Federal Judge Patricia Carter, no relation to Sergeant Carter, delivered sentencing 2 weeks later. Diane attended with Angela and Samuel, watching justice arrive with constitutional authority. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Carter began, her voice carrying the weight of federal precedent, "your actions represent a direct attack on federal authority and constitutional rights. You weaponized police against a federal judge. You violated civil rights in front of dozens of federal witnesses. You turned your neighborhood position into an instrument of racial terror." She paused, letting the charges settle. "This court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, 5 years supervised release, $150,000 in fines, and 2,000 hours of community service at civil rights organizations." Brad's sobs echoed through the courtroom. 3 years, federal prison, my children will lose everything." "You should have considered your children before attacking your neighbors," Judge Carter responded without sympathy. Former Sergeant David Carter faced separate prosecution for civil rights violations under color of law. His trial became a textbook case studied in police academies nationwide. Defendant Carter transformed his badge into an instrument of oppression, Federal Prosecutor Johnson explained. He used police authority to enforce racial discrimination, violating the constitutional rights of citizens he'd sworn to protect. Carter received 2 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment from law enforcement nationwide. No police department in America would ever hire him again. But the Jefferson case's impact extended far beyond individual prosecutions. Attorney General Williams announced sweeping reforms at a national press conference. "The Jefferson case demonstrates why we need federal oversight of local law enforcement responses to discrimination," she declared. "We're implementing the Jefferson Protocol, mandatory federal civil rights training, federal monitoring of 911 systems for racially motivated calls, and Department of Justice oversight of police departments with discrimination patterns." Samuel and Angela filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit seeking both damages and systemic reform. Civil rights attorney Robert Jackson represented them with passion that came from personal understanding. "This case seeks not just compensation," Jackson argued in federal court, "but fundamental changes to prevent other families from experiencing the terrorism my clients endured." Federal Judge Morrison presided. her connection to Samuel requiring no recusal since the case involved civil rights precedent rather than personal judgment. The settlement was unprecedented: $3.5 million in compensatory damages, $7 million in punitive damages, mandatory sensitivity training for the entire police department, federal monitoring of city policies for 7 years, creation of a federal civil rights ombudsman position. Law schools added Jefferson v. Whitmore to civil rights curricula. Police academies incorporated the case into mandatory bias training. Civil rights historians called it the most significant federal civil rights case since the 1960s. Congressional response was swift. Senator Rodriguez sponsored the Federal Officials Protection Act, inspired directly by Samuel's experience. No federal judge, prosecutor, or official should face racial harassment in their communities, Senator Rodriguez declared during floor debate. This legislation ensures federal protection follows federal officials home. The law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Enhanced penalties for targeting federal officials, rapid response teams for civil rights violations, federal funding for integration support programs. International attention followed. United Nations Civil Rights Commissioner Lopez cited Jefferson as demonstrating how federal systems could protect minority rights when local authorities failed. Brad's destruction was complete and irreversible. Federal conviction triggered cascading consequences: real estate license permanently revoked, business assets seized for fines and damages, social ostracism from former associates, children requiring therapy for trauma and shame. His country club revoked membership. Political allies publicly condemned his actions. Business partners dissolved all associations. The man who'd claimed to control the neighborhood became its cautionary tale. 6 months after sentencing, Diane stood in her daughter's backyard where the wedding had been disrupted. Federal marshals had removed all security. Life had returned to peaceful normalcy. But the transformation was permanent. Brookhaven Estates received federal designation as a civil rights heritage site. Property values increased due to federal attention and judicial prestige. The neighborhood that had harbored systematic racism became a model for federal civil rights enforcement. Judge Samuel Jefferson's confirmation ceremony occurred in the same courthouse where Brad was convicted. Diane attended, watching her son-in-law take judicial oath with his hand on a Bible, and Angela standing beside him in proud support. Having experienced discrimination firsthand, Judge Jefferson stated during his first major ruling, this court understands the urgent need for federal civil rights protection. His judicial decisions created binding precedents protecting minority professionals nationwide, expanded interpretation of civil rights statutes, enhanced protection for minority federal employees, stricter enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, federal oversight of local government discrimination. Educational institutions revolutionized civil rights training. The Jefferson Standard became the benchmark for federal civil rights protection. Scholarship programs supported minority students pursuing federal careers. 1 year after the wedding that changed everything, Angela hosted a celebration in their backyard. Federal colleagues attended alongside family members. Children played on grass where police had once threatened arrests. Laughter filled air that had been poisoned by hatred. Diane helped Angela carry food to tables, her heart full of gratitude and wonder. "Baby, who would have thought your wedding day would change civil rights enforcement nationwide?" Angela hugged her mother. "Mama, you taught me that quiet strength can move mountains. That dignity matters more than revenge. That truth will always prevail if we have courage to speak it." Samuel joined them, wrapping protective arms around both women. "Mama Diane, your courage to testify helped create precedent that will protect families for generations. You transformed personal trauma into federal justice." Through the fence, they could see Brad's house, sold at foreclosure, purchased by a young black couple who'd heard the neighborhood's story and wanted to be part of its transformation. The new owners waved from their porch, and Diane waved back. Justice had arrived in Brookhaven Estates, not revenge, not hatred, but real, constitutional, federal justice that proved individual courage could trigger systemic change, protecting entire communities. Diane raised her glass in a toast, to love conquering hate, to courage inspiring change, to justice arriving exactly when it's needed most. The celebration continued into evening, string lights twinkling between oak branches, laughter rising toward stars, hope replacing the hatred that had once poisoned this place. Brad Whitmore served his federal sentence while Samuel Jefferson shaped civil rights law that would protect Americans for generations. The contrast illustrated how federal justice transforms both perpetrators and victims, one facing consequences, the other wielding authority to prevent future incidents. And Diane Carter, who'd spent 30 years being invisible to powerful people, finally understood that her quiet strength had always been visible where it mattered most, in her daughter's courage, in federal protection, in constitutional justice, arriving to defend those who'd been told they didn't belong. Part 8. 2 years later, Judge Samuel Jefferson sat in his federal chambers, morning sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the city. His desk held case files involving civil rights violations, discrimination complaints, and constitutional challenges. The work he'd dedicated his life to, now wielded with federal judicial authority. A framed photograph sat beside his computer, Angela in her wedding dress, Diane standing beside her, both women smiling despite everything that day had brought. The image reminded him daily why justice mattered, why precedent protected people, why federal authority existed. People ask if that wedding day changed me, Samuel reflected during an interview with a civil rights documentary crew. The truth is, experiencing injustice while knowing I'd soon have federal power taught me that justice delayed is justice denied. Every ruling I make considers families facing harassment, minorities targeted by prejudice, people who need federal protection from local hatred. His courtroom had become a landmark. Law students observed proceedings. International delegations studied federal civil rights enforcement. His opinions were cited nationwide, creating binding precedents that reshaped constitutional interpretation. Dr. Angela Jefferson sat in her office at Metropolitan Children's Hospital, surrounded by grateful letters from families whose children she'd saved. Federal appointments decorated her walls: Surgeon General's Advisory Committee, Federal Health Equity Task Force, National Civil Rights in Medicine Board. Our wedding trauma became a catalyst for change, Angela told medical students during lectures. I ensure minority communities receive federal health care protections that local prejudice can't undermine. Every child deserves surgical care regardless of their family's race or neighborhood. Diane Carter still lived with her daughter and son-in-law, her presence grounding their extraordinary lives with everyday humanity. She'd become something unexpected, a civil rights speaker, invited to churches and community centers to share her story of quiet courage transforming into federal justice. For 30 years, I cleaned hotel rooms for people who never learned my name, she told audiences. I was invisible, but my daughter saw me. My son-in-law honored me. And when hatred attacked our family, federal justice defended us. That's what the Constitution promises: protection for everyone, even invisible black women who spend their lives serving others. Brad Whitmore served his 3rd year in federal prison, his orange jumpsuit replacing expensive suits, his cell replacing the McMansion he'd lost to foreclosure. The Department of Justice brought him to police academies to speak about racism's consequences. I destroyed everything because I couldn't accept black success, Brad told rooms full of officers, his voice hollow with regret. I lost my family, my business, my freedom, my reputation, all because I chose hatred over humanity. Every day I live with knowing I terrorized innocent people who'd done nothing wrong except buy a house in a neighborhood I thought belonged only to people like me. His real estate empire existed only in bankruptcy filings. His wife and children had relocated across the country, changing their names to escape association. His mugshot appeared in federal training materials, a cautionary tale about weaponizing authority against minorities. Former Sergeant David Carter worked with Justice Department training officers after serving federal time. His career destruction warned law enforcement about constitutional violations. "My actions nearly destroyed innocent people," Carter addressed police recruits. "I let a complainant's claimed connections override my training, my instincts, and my oath to protect constitutional rights. I traded 20 years of honorable service for prejudice, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." The Jefferson Protocol transformed law enforcement nationwide. Federal monitoring systems flagged racially motivated 911 calls. Rapid response teams investigated potential civil rights violations before they escalated. Mandatory training programs taught officers to recognize weaponized complaints. Congressional legislation established permanent protections. The Federal Officials Protection Act enhanced penalties for targeting minority professionals. Federal funding supported integrated community development. Civil rights enforcement became a national priority with teeth. Brookhaven Estates transformed into a federally recognized model community. International delegations visited to study integration success. Federal grants attracted diverse professionals. Property values soared due to judicial prestige and civil rights designation. The neighborhood that had harbored systematic racism became a symbol of transformation, proof that federal authority could protect minorities from local prejudice, that individual courage could catalyze systemic change, that love could conquer hatred when backed by constitutional justice. Samuel's judicial legacy grew with each ruling. Enhanced federal safeguards for minority professionals, expedited jurisdiction over harassment cases, stricter penalties for false police reports, comprehensive oversight of local law enforcement in integrated communities. Law schools taught his opinions. Civil rights organizations cited his precedents. Young lawyers dreamed of clerking in his chambers. His influence shaped constitutional interpretation for an entire generation. Angela's medical innovations saved lives while her civil rights advocacy protected healthcare access. She testified before Congress about racial disparities in pediatric care. Her research appeared in international journals. Her voice carried federal authority that demanded healthcare justice. And Diane, invisible for 30 years, became a symbol of quiet strength that could move mountains. Her testimony in Brad's trial was studied in law schools. Her speeches inspired communities. Her presence at civil rights conferences reminded everyone that justice protected ordinary people, not just those with power and position. 3 years after the wedding that changed everything, they gathered again in their backyard. Federal colleagues attended alongside family members. Children played where police had once threatened. Laughter filled air that had been poisoned by hatred. To 3 years of transformation, Samuel toasted. To federal justice protecting all Americans. To courage inspiring change. To love conquering hate. Glasses clinked, voices rose together, and celebration continued into evening. String lights twinkling between oak branches. Hope replacing the hatred that had once threatened to destroy them. Through the fence, the young black couple who'd purchased Brad's foreclosed house waved from their porch. Their children played in a yard where hatred had once festered, their presence proof that transformation was permanent. Samuel wrapped his arms around Angela and Diane, 3 people who'd endured terrorism and transformed it into federal precedent protecting millions. "Mama Diane," Samuel said softly. "You taught me something more powerful than any law school could. You taught me that justice isn't just about rulings and precedents. It's about protecting families, honoring dignity, and ensuring that no one, not powerful neighbors, not police officers, not anyone, can make people feel unwelcome in homes they've earned." Diane smiled, her face reflecting 3 years of peace after 3 months of terror. "Baby, I just did what my mama taught me. Stand firm in truth. Keep your dignity even when others try to strip it away. Trust that justice will arrive if you have courage to wait for it." "But you didn't just wait," Angela added. "You testified, you spoke truth. You transformed personal pain into federal protection for everyone." As evening deepened into night, the celebration continued, a testament to love surviving hatred's best efforts, to federal justice protecting constitutional rights, to ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded it. Brad Whitmore remained in federal prison, his sentence a reminder that weaponizing authority against minorities carried serious consequences. His name was spoken in police academies and law schools, not with sympathy, but as a warning about hatred's inevitable cost. The Jefferson case proved that federal institutions could protect rights when local systems failed. It demonstrated that individual courage could trigger systemic change. It showed that love, backed by constitutional authority, was stronger than prejudice, more powerful than hatred, more enduring than any attempt to diminish human dignity. Diane looked at her daughter and son-in-law, Angela, who'd saved hundreds of children's lives, Samuel, who'd shaped civil rights law protecting millions, and felt gratitude wash over her like warm rain after drought. For 30 years she'd been invisible, but her daughter had always seen her, her son-in-law had honored her, and when hatred attacked their family, federal justice had defended them all. That was the promise of America, imperfect, sometimes delayed, often requiring courage to claim it, but ultimately real. Constitutional protection for everyone, federal justice for all Americans, dignity defended by law when local prejudice tried to destroy it. The celebration continued under stars that witnessed transformation. A neighborhood changed, a legal system strengthened, a family vindicated, and quiet courage rewarded with justice that would echo through generations. And Diane Carter, once invisible, now stood visible in the most important ways, in her daughter's achievements, in federal protection, in constitutional justice that proved love could always, ultimately, triumphantly conquer hate. The end. If you were in their place, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. Your opinion matters. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Grace Stories community. Where are you watching from?